superintendents, principals, school boards repeatedly violate this law and tell immigrants that their kids don't have a right to come to school. And unfortunately, what happens is most of them will believe it. And so those kids are left without any recourse or relief, unless of course they find their way to me and I make a phone call to the superintendent. And there was this one instance in this very nice town, in the middle of the state, and my clients, who speak very good English, had come to me and said the principal said, the child had a B visitor visa. I mean, that she overstayed, she's undocumented, she's all of 11 years old, right? And so the principal told her parents, or her guardians, that she has to have authority. She can't come here on a visitor visa. We can't put her in school. We can't accept her. And so they found me, and I went back to the principal, the superintendent, and the superintendent tells me this. After I sort of exchanged voicemails with him, and if someone's not calling me back, the firmness of my voicemail will increase in substance so that they will eventually call me back. And so the superintendent tells me, oh no, your clients misheard. We didn't say that their child couldn't come to school. Of course they can come to school. And I said back to the superintendent, I'm like, really, don't tell me that, because my clients speak quite fine English, and they happen not to be white, so maybe you don't think they do, but they understood exactly what your principal was saying. And so the kid was in school the next day. And the reason I spell it out is because I just have absolutely no patience or tolerance for this level of people that are supposed to know better. These are the people that are in charge. And for superintendents and principals to treat, and actually the guardians were U.S. citizens. They were U.S. citizens, taxpayers, property owners in this town. And this little girl who's all of 11 years old generates this kind of hostility from people who are paid with our tax dollars to be in charge of our children's education is quite fundamentally, to me, foul and unacceptable. So, and I've seen this over and over again. So, the case that talks about this is Plyler versus Doe. It's a Supreme Court case. It was generated out of California when they were doing the proposition to say undocumented kids, we're not going to let undocumented kids come to school. It hasn't so far been overturned, of course. With the court, you never know what may happen in the future. But that's the current state of the law. So it's just basic, and people will fight you on it, but it's, unfortunately, they cave when a lawyer becomes involved, and not that many, they work in the percentages, basically. They figure most people aren't going to fight it, so why shouldn't we get away with it? And that's pretty much the MO. And that's in the realm of education. The other case that's interesting, or the cases that are interesting when it comes to workers' rights and protections. Now, actually, most undocumented immigrants will have, including undocumented immigrants, will have, whether they're temporary, whether they're green card holders, or whether they're undocumented, the Fair Labor Standards Act and all of the OSHA and all the worker protections do apply to undocumented immigrants. Documentation does not matter when it comes to those constitutional rights. There's a little bit of a chipping away. There's a case called Hoffman Plastics, and it's this very technical and piece of employment law that talks about back pay, and the immigrant actually did lose in that case. In certain areas of back pay, they may not be entitled to the same relief that a U.S. citizen would. But that's an anomaly and sort of a very distinct piece of the law. But in every other area, they are protected constitutionally from discrimination, Title VII discrimination, and all of the other types of civil rights that apply. Again, persons under the law. That's and if the other side wants to have a fight about whether we should alter the 14th Amendment, and there are those in Congress who would agree with that, they want to take away birthright citizenship, and I'll get to that in a second. That is an incredibly ignorant idea, but if they want to have, that's a different discussion. If they want to put their money where their mouth is and take rights away and alter the 14th Amendment, let's have that argument, because I think that they're going to lose really big on that. And then there's this other area of when people encounter the legal system. So unlike when immigrants do enter into the immigration system, they get due process. Most will get a hearing, but they do not have the right to counsel. That is where immigration law is very distinct from criminal law. So a lot of people sort of assume, oh, if you're an immigrant and you're put into proceedings, you must get an attorney appointed to you. No, you don't, unfortunately. And there's a very high number of pro se cases in the immigration court, and unfortunately they lose a lot of the time. So it's something we try to work on and get the word out that people just need to have an attorney if they're going through that process. But there's a very small, a small benefit that has come through in the past few years in a Supreme Court case, Padilla versus Kentucky. And that actually said, though you don't have a right to state-appointed counsel, if you do have counsel as the immigrant, you have the right to effective counsel. So if somebody had ineffective counsel in a previous proceeding, they might get a chance to reopen their case, which is very, very hard to do in immigration, to get a case reopened. But if they had a bad lawyer, ineffective assistance of counsel, they can now maybe get another chance. It's a small carving out. They're never ever going to have, in my opinion, the right to an appointed attorney. That's not in the cards. But they do at least have the right to competent counsel. And believe me, I call myself the fixer a lot, because the cases that come to me from other attorneys are atrocious. And there's people that pretend to practice immigration law, and then there's people who actually really do practice immigration law. So the person really needs to be a specialist to make sure that they're getting all the possible benefits and relief for the immigrant in that situation. So, birthright citizenship. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just to give you an idea of how atrocious an idea it is. I have clients that come from other countries where birthright citizenship is not the law, and it is insane. Because you'll have a child, for example, in Iran, for example, you can only get birthright through the father. You can't get birthright through the mother. So the mother can have lived in Iran for her whole life, and she cannot pass on citizenship to that child if the husband is not a citizen. That kid is stateless. Because if you're born in Iran, and then if the U.S. citizen, if the parent is a U.S. citizen, getting acquired citizenship or citizenship through that U.S. parent may be possible, but it can be an arduous situation. If you can't get that, the kid can't get a passport. How can we get her here? How can we process the documents? She's stateless. So again, if the other side wants to have that argument that we're going to turn millions of people into stateless, displaced persons, let's have that, because this is so fundamental. If somebody is born here, they're going to be a citizen, and it's just not going to change, because I've seen firsthand, this is penalizing children for the sins of their parents, or the violations of law of their parents. It has absolutely nothing to do with the child. So if we're going to be some kind of decent society that believes in human rights instead of just talking about human rights, then this is, I feel very firmly that we need to stand strong against. There is that feeling of people pushing that. There's been bills put forward in Congress on that. So those are the areas of rights. Now, the second area that I deal with all the time, of course, is business. And a lot of people don't equate immigration necessarily with business, because in the media all the time, all they talk about is legalization and how should we do it, and there's never really a focus on business. And if there is, it's always about, how many H-1Bs is Microsoft employing, or how many computer analysts can we get into the country. They never talk about small business, and that's really where the bulk of the work I do. I've represented large companies and Fortune 500 companies, but the most cutting edge technology is coming from these smaller companies. And what both the Democrats and the Republicans are doing is that they are carrying the water for the big businesses. All of the talk on immigration reform is really for big corporations. Because what happens for the H-1B, for example, it's a professional visa, it's a bachelor level visa. So every year we get 65,000 of them. What happens? Indian companies like Wipro and Tata and Satyam and Microsoft, they're the top users of the H-1B category. They scarf all of them up. And then when my small company of 20 or 50 or 100 people, they just want one or two H-1B visas because they have that researcher, they have that developer, they have a chef. I mean, there's a whole other area outside of science, technology, engineering, and math of industries in this country that utilize the category, except for they're completely blacked out of it because all of the big companies are sucking up the numbers. And the solution I put forward, I recently had an op-ed published in the Boston Herald, is very simple. For the H-1B category, no company can use more than 4% of the total. That's basic. But in all of the time that I've done immigration advocacy and all the time that I've been involved in politics, I have not once seen a single Democrat, Republican, Green Party, or anybody ever come up with that idea. And you know why? Because they don't work in the real world where we see what is really happening on the ground and how immigration policy actually affects employers, especially the small business. And there's a lot of controversy with the H-1B, but again, what never sort of gets talked about, and a lot of those big companies, quite frankly, are abusing the program. They are paying people lower than the prevailing wage. Not my guys, because they can't afford to have the Department of Labor or the Department of Homeland Security come in and investigate, because their business would be done. But the bigger players can absorb those costs, and that's exactly what they want. They want to operate in this sort of ad hoc system that we have because it benefits them, the large ones. And meanwhile, all the small businesses are killing themselves in fees and complying with regulations just to make sure they're following the guidelines. So it makes it hard for them to compete with the other people in their industry. So unless there's a focus, and I haven't seen that. I haven't seen any kind of focus coming from either side of the aisle where we're really going to talk about serious fundamental reform that's going to help small businesses and people who really need these workers. Because when you have an H-1B, especially in the smaller company, that H-1B tends to create jobs. It doesn't take jobs away. I have had a company where someone came in, they were a very high-level MIT technological expert. And as soon as they hired that person, they then hired 3 more U.S. workers. But they couldn't hire the U.S. workers until they had the other guy come in, because he was going to be the guy who was going to have the patent. He had the specialized knowledge. Or a chef that chef H-1Bs are difficult to do. I recently won one. Somebody had said that they liked during the campaign my line that I fight the Department of Homeland Security and I win. So that's my tagline. But and this chef, this woman, very talented, after she was hired, they added on 4 more people, and now they're opening a second restaurant, and they're going to add 10 more workers. So we have to talk about immigration in a way that all of the benefits, but we have to have the facts at our disposal in order to combat the myths that are always out there, and get the media, for heaven's sake. I mean, it's hard to get them to report anything that might resemble the truth in immigration, but these are the basic bedrock pieces that I see that are the way to winning this idea and reform. And am I coming up to my?
You don't, yeah.
Okay. So I'll just wrap up, and I'll save most of this for the Q&A, because people with immigration reform, we could talk about it 2 hours. But here's the way I see it. Been there, done that, kind of. It's a replay of a really bad movie, and I'm not sure that. And everybody thinks this is the time, this is the year, and we're going to get there because the Republicans can't help but want it because they did so poorly in the last election. And I just don't see, the discussion they're having is the same discussion they had in 2006 and 2007. How are we going to legalize 11 million? How are we going to get as many people in here for the big corporations? Like, they're talking about guest worker visas. This was an idea that they floated in 2006 and 2007, and since they haven't put out a plan, I can't really talk about details. But what their plan was back then was that we were going to let people come here for 2 years. They were going to have to leave for a year. Then they were going to go back for another 2. Then they were going to leave again for a year. Then they were going to come back again. They were going to get a total of 6 years. Oh, isn't that generous for them to work in the U.S.? And then after 6 years, bye-bye, we'll see you later. They wanted to have 400,000, this was Bush and the Democrats, 400,000 guest worker visas. Now, I don't know about you, but when you start talking about 400,000 of anything to the American public, I can't imagine, first of all, how you can sell that to them. Secondly, as a matter of policy, it's a horrible idea. It's basically bringing over indentured workers, using them for their labor, and then sending them back home. And, oh, by the way, we tried this before. It was called the Bracero program, and it was massive exploitation of Mexican workers, and it was pretty bad. So this is the kind of thing, like when you have I want bipartisanship more than anybody. But when you have bipartisanship that only serves the purpose of the people at the top and not really the people at the bottom or even in the middle, this is your problem. And so what I'm seeing right now in the discussion of immigration reform is mostly more of the same. And we can get to good immigration policy without giving away the store to all the businesses at the top. And you know, maybe we need is skilled worker visas, absolutely, but not in the form of guest workers and not 400,000 level. Let's start out with, you know, 75,000, see how that goes, see how the economy absorbs it, and then go from there. Finally, I'll wrap up with my piece on, my op-ed, this bipartisan idea that we're gonna give automatic green cards to kids who graduate in the STEM sector, science, technology, engineering, and math. And I know a lot of my immigration colleagues and a lot of people from my party are in complete disagreement with me, but I think that idea is one of the dumbest I have heard from Congress, and I'll tell you why. Number one, a green card is not something that we give away. It is a privilege. It is not a right, and it's something to be earned. We absolutely want to keep talent here, and there's a way to do that. It's called the H-1B program. Maybe we expand that. Like I said, we limit companies so more people can get in the game. There's lots of ways, and people can come here temporarily. They have to be matched to an employer. The other reason why it's a bad idea, an automatic green card. What happens if we have another dip in the economy? You have all of these people now with green cards. You have created an entirely new workforce that won't be able to find jobs, and they're not tied to employers. Our current system, in order to get a green card, you must be tied to an employer. And that's it has a lot of problems. We need to work out a lot of issues, but at least there's a baseline in that you have to prove that you didn't displace a U.S. worker, and I think that is very important. And we're not going to win over the American public if we just say, like, let's just start giving away automatic green cards. I just think my grandparents came over on the boat from Sicily. You know, we had different policy back then. It was open borders, and it's an entirely different story. So I love immigration. I'm an immigration advocate. There is no one stronger on this issue than I am. But when someone like me looks at that idea and says, that's probably not the best way to go, I think people really need to take a look at what bipartisanship is really producing. And again, and another point on that, again, it's not just STEM people that we want to keep here. What about nurses? What about healthcare workers? I mean, you've seen the statistics of shortages across the board in healthcare. It completely leaves out entire sectors of the economy to the benefit of just this sector. And again, why? Because the biggest corporations at the top want those visas and the green cards. So don't just buy the bipartisanship sell, look behind what's coming from that, and always question anything you see in the media about immigration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marisa. Our next speaker will be Steve Grossman, State Treasurer.
Thank you, and Kevin is